I get a motion to accept tonight's agenda?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, who am I turning over the presentation and discussion of the capital project to?
I think it's in the hands of the committee and Brian.
Yeah, I think since I'm back, I'll resume my role as our lead presenter.
And you've moved down the table now, you're not?
Yes, I'm no longer in quarantine or isolation, so.
God.
Yeah, but, yeah, I will say, since a lot of the presentation is the same as what we've seen at several meetings, I am going to go probably quicker through certain portions than in the past, just to not drone on and repeat. And, you know, obviously, I think we'll do the same things we did last time, which is, you know, section by section. If there are questions from the board that they want to jump in on, we'll allow that, so that way it's a little more manageable and we don't have, you know, everything just jumping around at the end. So with that, we'll get started.
Right there, you mean, right there.
No, it'll work. It'll work. The other way, just get a bigger picture.
We good to go? So if we could go to our first slide, which I think-
We actually gave you the
Where's the
pointer.
quick-
It was right
Oh,
in front.
where has it? Ah,
And the laser pointer works on this one.
ooh, that may be beyond my abilities.
It's not, the range doesn't work.
Right, that's it. Oh, here we go, okay. So obviously, you know, here's the overview of the presentation, which I think everyone's familiar with by now, which is why now, what we've done to date to plan for it, the scope of the work that's being proposed in our familiar categories: safety and security, infrastructure, energy efficiency, and modernizing learning spaces. Obviously, the costs and the timelines. So
It's not going?
yeah, it's not going.
Where's the other one?
No. It's where it is. You just have to advance it. No, it's where it is. Don't close that.
There we go. I'm gonna test if I go this way, if I aim at the computer. Nope.
Brian,
Yeah, plug it in. Not plug it in.
technology. Okay, so Brian, just tell me next.
You got it. Thanks, Carol.
You got the pointer still.
Okay. So, obviously, why now? You know, as we've said throughout the process, we have, you know, several critical, time-sensitive needs that need to be addressed. We have aging infrastructure. There's necessary repairs at all of our schools, as well as safety and security improvements that have come forth, you know, in part with our partner at Altaris and their recommendations. The desire to modernize our learning spaces and address our storage needs. As we've said repeatedly, these types of expenditures just are not within the general budget, and with our current, excuse me, you know, bonds that are expiring, this is the right time now, we feel, to go out and tackle these real pressing needs for the district. Next. So, as I was alluding to, the goal is to be budget or tax neutral. The new payments will replace the expiring payments in the budget, and you know, it's all been laid out here before. Our borrowing costs are still low, so again, this is a further reason why it makes sense to go and do this now. And we estimate that, approximately 90% of the project will be reimbursable at approximately a 20% reimbursement rate. Obviously getting state aid will reduce our overall expenditures. Next. So, again, as I alluded to, here's some examples of the capital work that's done each year. We only have about $180,000 a year to devote to these types of projects to be able to tackle some small type projects, but we just don't have the resources to tackle the large scale needs that we have. Next. So, as we've talked about, throughout the process, we've had work with our partners at H2M and Triton, who provides construction management expertise to help shape this. We had the input of the Capital Project Planning Committee to help determine the scope. We reviewed our buildings condition surveys, and as we all heard, it started with a full list of projects, which then got winnowed down, and today, we're here now to give the B&G's final recommendations to put to the full board to then vote on eventually for a community vote as well. So, again, as I alluded to, we had the planning committee that was made up of Board of Ed members for the B&G committee, administration, representatives from the teachers, our CSEA representatives, community representatives. We had each school represented there with parents as well as PTSA involvement, and then again our architect and construction managers and security and technology consultants were all part of that process. We had a list of 52 items, which were the initial scope. We then had further meetings with principals and architects to flesh out some more requests, and that's where we are today now with this final scope. So this is the disclaimer portion of the evening, I guess. So it's important to note, as we've said throughout, that all of our designs or sketches are representative. We can only do limited design work before we have an approved bond. So while we've tried to do some work to give some ideas, the final detailed design work can't be done at this point, and it'll be a collaborative process with the architects following an approved bond. So again, as we've said all along, the goal is to remain budget neutral. Current borrowing rates are around 3%. So at the bottom here you see, on a 20-year bond at the different rates, how much you could borrow. And we've said all along that we want to be conservative in this. So while the yield curves and projections, may look to say that we're all going to be at 3.5 or 3.25, we've aimed towards the bottom portion of this in determining the scope. And as you'll see, depending on which option we choose, we're going to be, somewhere between 17, high 17 millions and high 18 millions, depending on the final scope. And here we go. So the current recommendations are just shy of 18 million, and we'll go into the detailed cost estimates later. To preview, there is one piece that we'll ask the board to consider as an addition, which would be about another $850,000 that would get added, which we'll discuss later regarding LED lighting. And here it is. So this is the second option, which is adding $875 for LEDs, which would take us up to $18.8 million. The advantages here is that we wouldn't have to do the LEDs as a performance project. Let me just actually step back, because we had talked throughout the process of having LEDs as part of the overall scope of work that we wanted to do. It was part of the 52 items. It's something that we always wanted to do. When we started getting our initial costs, they were first, we didn't know if we'd be able to do it. Then when we saw the costs and all of the other items that we were looking to tackle, we didn't think we would have enough room in the bond initially to include it. So the idea was to separate it out and do a energy performance contract to fund it. But now, given some additional changes that we'll get to, namely around the garage. We feel that there is the additional funds in our initial target to tackle this now, which would enable us to begin the project quickly. It would avoid the energy performance contract, and the projections we've seen for savings year over year from the LED lighting would then be applied to other budgetary needs. The initial projections were, close to $100,000 in energy cost savings that we would realize on a yearly basis from the LED lights. So that would be something that we could use to fund ongoing work. Also, by wrapping it into the bond as a whole, we're likely to get a lower borrowing cost for it than if we were to go out as an energy performance contract and separately finance it. So, and as I've said, and it's at the bottom here, we'd still be comfortably within our borrowing limit even by including this. And I think we'll have a discussion in terms of where the board feels on it, but at least it's the recommendation of B&G that this is a second option that should be considered for all of these reasons.
I just want to ask a question. I think you did a great job, if we could just go back to that last slide. But could you speak a little bit to that third bullet about the energy savings, the difference between if we do it as a contract versus this method?
Sure. So when we get energy savings, we will be, if we do an energy performance contract, the energy savings that we get would then have to be applied toward the payments that we would use to borrow for the energy performance contract. So it would basically be paying off the lease or the interest costs of the money we borrow. If we do it as part of the bond, we're going to be bonding it for the 20-year period the same way, but then those savings could be then applied to other things in our budget if we needed them for other items and you'll see in our budget presentation next Tuesday where we're still struggling to come up to be able to fund all the initiatives we want to do. So that would be helping that every year in terms of things. You can't bond for any type of instructional or other types of work, but you can bond for LED lighting. So that would give us a little extra wiggle room is basically how I would look at it.
Yeah, because as Cal pointed out, which I didn't say as clearly, under the performance contract, those savings by replacing all of our lights with LEDs would go to paying off the cost of the LEDs, so we wouldn't see them for the first 10 years. You typically have a 10-year contract, and those $100,000 in savings are basically retained by the financing firm that's underwriting the initial work. So if we do it in the bond, we'll be able to get that $100,000 or so savings back every year in our reduced electricity expenses. So that's a smaller expense that we would have, which would then free up that money for other budgetary needs.
But we have increased debt service, but you think we come out ahead?
Oh, yeah, we come out ahead.
Well,
And
we wouldn't have increase, we'd have slightly increased debt service on that 800, but since you'd be at a lower rate and spread out over a longer period,
Come out ahead.
you'd come out ahead.
Right.
And
Okay.
since we already have a budget item for the borrowing costs, and we'd still be at or less than that number, even at this higher amount, we'd be a net positive on it.
Great.
Can I ask just one question? Are we going to cover later what actually putting in LED lighting looks like and how quickly it can happen, or is that something you want to cover now? In terms of where it wouldn't be installed and how quickly we could get that done?
Basically, we should probably talk about that later, but.
Later, right.
The plan is to put it everywhere, so there would be every light would be LED. The company who did the proposal went and did a full audit of every single fixture, and that price is based on their actual detailed audit of every single fixture. Now, we already have LED lights in our gyms and a few places, but this would complete it. And from what I understand from other districts, it's a softer light, it's a better light for instruction, and it's a lot warmer.
Yeah, and
Not warmer in temperature, warmer in a feeling, and it's also actually maybe a little bit less than the fluorescent in terms of temperature.
Right. And the other thing that they said is that they'll come in, they'll show us samples of the different options for lighting in the classroom, so we can see something before we go and install it in every classroom. I think the only caveat I would say to rolling out entirely, we may not put LED lighting in the library.
The spaces we plan to renovate.
Right, exactly. The space that we plan to renovate, we would not put the LED lighting in the first instance. We would have them come back and do that afterwards, so we don't put something in that we're going to have to then potentially move or take out. But the goal will be at the end of all of the projects to have LED lighting throughout. And we've heard from other districts in the area who have both used this company and were satisfied with the work, and also talked about the difference it made in the environment, just in terms of just walking into a room and how much better it was.
I guess while we're at it then, the second bullet, why is this faster? I mean, we know that the process overall with the bond can move quite
Because
slowly.
it's a kind of a turnkey thing. The company can start, if I told them to come tomorrow,
The
they'd come.
SED approval is not
You
long?
don't need SED approval to change light fixtures.
Great,
Yeah.
okay. More good news.
So, our familiar scope of work, which you talked about, which came from the condition survey, the 5-year capital plan, our community-based committee work, the work of the B&G committee, in partnership with our architects and engineering firms and their partners, as well as Altaris, our security consultant. We really did go building by building to look at what were the priority needs for each building, and as we talked about, we've put it into these 4 buckets: safety and security, infrastructure, energy efficiency, and modernizing learning spaces. So safety and security, this hasn't changed. These are still the same ideas that we presented all throughout. So, it's the idea of enclosing the campus, having vestibules and a new entry at the high school, vestibules at all of the other schools as well, security cameras, better signage, better exterior lighting, a card access system for the doors with the ability to have auto lockdowns, and then some safety film on certain windows.
And we spent a good amount of time speaking about this section in your initial meeting. What date was that, if somebody wanted to go and watch it on video? Because
I'm going to say it was February 6th, or no,
February-
7th.
All the presentations are on our website under the capital project section, and you can go and get the progression. They're all in there, and they're all dated, so you can kind of go back.
Right.
Each one kind of builds on the previous one, so I do encourage people to do that.
Yeah, no, and at that meeting on February 7th, Altaris was here and answered questions and provided information in terms of their security recommendations, which were helpful in the formulation of the overall scope of this, so.
So, great, yeah, I see it is February 7th.
So, this is the picture we've always shown in terms of some of the entry points to the campus that we're looking to enclose. Go next, and, here's the site diagram with the dotted ovals or squares or rectangles, depending on all the different shapes, where the different enclosures would be. Here are just some representative drawings of what those enclosures could look like. The goal is to, maximize the light and try to keep it open to the extent possible. And also, I think as we've talked throughout, in most places, these are only going to be one-sided, so it will be on the exterior facing portion, but like, for example, if you're going from the middle school to the science wing, there's an entry point there. There'll only be a wall on one side, and the courtyard side will still be open.
Right.
So, here is the campus enclosure, just another example, which I think we can skip past. This hasn't changed. Again, we've talked about the need to create a new entry for multiple reasons. One is security purposes. 2, it's just inefficient to have our main entry point so far away from the main office and where our visitors are coming on a daily basis. And it's frankly not the most attractive way for someone to enter the building. So a new entry will deal with all of those issues. So again, this is the plan where those steps going up to the atrium will be removed, will be regraded to make it ADA compliant. It will have a security vestibule out front to allow people to be scanned in beforehand, and that's the specifics. Again, this hasn't changed. But what we do have is a nice rendering of what the entry would look like. So as you can see,
This is an example.
this is a representative example of what it may look like. Again, we'd have to go through design work, but this is the type of work that's being envisioned. As you can see, it's all graded now with so it can be accessible if someone was in a wheelchair or otherwise, had trouble walking, and it just could be a much better way to get everyone into the building. So again, also what we've talked about is improving the traffic flow, getting our cars and buses a little further away from the building, changing the parking alignment a little bit to make it more efficient. We're going to pick up a few parking spaces in that as well, which is good since we are parking challenged. But again, this is all the same as the prior presentation. So again, we talked extensively about the safety and security piece and the audit and the best practices, and we've tried to take those into account. They're all listed there, but also as we've been talking about, trying to marry this with our school-based mental health and SEL programs that also are looking at the overall wellness of the entire student body, which also has a safety and security piece to it. So now we have infrastructure, which is, in some ways the part that no one thinks is very interesting, but is critical to maintaining our facilities so that our students and our staff have buildings to work in that are good buildings, that don't have leaks in the roof, and that have bathrooms that work, and floors that are in good shape, and all of the things that you have to do at your house over time to keep it in good shape, we have to do in the district as well. Unfortunately, our buildings are a lot bigger than most people's houses, so there's just a lot of work to be done. And again, this is the same list that we've presented throughout. So I think the one piece that has drawn a lot of community interest is the maintenance building, and that's one of the things that we've put out in infrastructure all along. So there is a now new recommendation that the B&G committee is going to make on that, which is to have a smaller building behind the high school. Carol, could you go, do we have the slide next with the location, or is it?
No,
No,
it's another 6 slides away.
So,
It's 30.
Yeah.
so here we go. So to skip ahead, since so that yellow box is the proposed location.
Slide 30.
No, that's separate. No, we want
They
this.
got it.
This is what we want. So this is now the new proposed location for a facilities building for our maintenance staff. It is projected at 1,125 square feet, which is smaller than the previous proposed building. It's about a third of the size. But obviously at a third of the size, it's not going to accomplish all of the things that the prior building would do. This building would do two things. It would, A, allow for work on one vehicle to happen at a time, so our maintenance staff can get out of the cold when they need to work on a vehicle, and it will also provide room to store gas-powered equipment such as our snow blowers, lawn mowers, and other equipment that's used at the campus, because those things can't be stored in a school building. So this is the now new proposal that B&G is coming forward with for this. Right now we're projecting it at 1125. There is some rock back in that area, so if we run into issues with excavation, the footprint may get somewhat smaller, but the target would be 1125 because that would at least meet the need of getting one bay and the other storage. And then also there'll be some excavation and regrading in that area, which will allow for better emergency vehicle access to the back of the school. Most people probably don't know, even though it's been mentioned at different meetings here, that when you go back around there, that's actually, let's see if we can get the pointer to work. Yeah, so if we go back around here, this is actually a fire lane back there, so it will allow for better access for those trucks if necessary with some of the regrading.
And I think it's also important to note that that area is a hill. So you're basically building this so that it's not really going to be very visible from the neighborhood behind it. It is going to be kind of stuck into that hill. We're gonna be digging out that hill. And that is one advantage definitely to that area.
So have we looked at the height? I mean, how does it compare, what would be the roof line relative to?
And this is our architect, Veronica Burns.
Hello, everybody. So yes, we anticipate that if there's a 10 or a 12-foot tall bay door or garage door on it, that the overall ridge elevation is about 17. However, there is about, say, 8 to 10 foot grade change between the actual parking area and to the high point of the hill behind it. So we would only anticipate, difference between that 8 to 10 feet and the 17 feet will be visible from, I'll say, the property line or the back.
Sorry, do we want to ask some questions here? Did you have more to say about this section before we ask questions?
Well, I think, there's the, second piece of it, if we go back one slide.
One slide on?
Yeah. So, this is the second piece of it, which is that we would put a second building in place, which would just be a smaller, just storage shed behind the district office at Dow's Lane to store equipment at that location. So there'll be no vehicle storage in that building. It would be really designed to be a replacement for the current storage in the modular building, which is falling apart. So this would be a replacement for that space and would be a much smaller facility, just right back behind the district office. So we've now, instead of trying to put everything in one centralized location, we've scaled back. We're still confident that we can get the storage of the lawnmowers, snow blowers, and so forth in these two spaces, but we now only will have the ability for one vehicle to be inside at times, and that really has led to the reduction in the overall size.
Where do you want to go? Backward again?
I guess everything else behind it hasn't changed, so, if we want to go back, we'll go real quickly through, the other pieces.
And the only thing I would like to add about the storage is the one at Dow's Lane will really just have minimal, it'll have minimal electricity, and the one up at the campus will have electricity and water with the separator.
And, so I have water, sewer, and electric.
Water and sewer and all.
Right, yes.
With an oil-water separator there, so that way if we're washing a truck or there's a truck in there, that will all be taken care of according to appropriate environmental requirements. So, I think at this point, since this is really the only, major deviation from our prior proposal made at this point, if the board has questions on this, we'll take questions now on this piece, and then we'll continue with the rest.
About this?
Yeah, just about the new approach here.
Decentralized kind of too.
I'm comfortable with the approach, and I'm thankful that, we're looking for solutions that all of the neighborhoods can get their heads around. I guess my question is, so I understand, when we say that we may hit rock, and we may have to make the size of this building at the high school smaller. Does that mean there's a potential of losing, for example, the bay that is, so we've recited it there expressly for that purpose to make sure that there is still a place for trucks to back in. So how would you envision, like what's the plan in place at this time if they have to shrink the size of this building? How does it shrink in a way that is still functional for our needs?
I was going to say, Veronica could take that. I think that's a good question in terms of how much would we expect the building to kind of to reduce in size, depending on what we.
1125 to what?
Yeah, to what, like, or maybe Kevin could speak to that. Yeah,
So,
Kevin is from Triton Construction, our
yeah, this is our
construction
construction manager.
thank you and good evening.
Hi,
Yeah,
Kevin.
So we did take into consideration when we put the estimate together that there would be some rock removal in that area. So we should have covered that within those costs. But rock is, I don't know how much of it is actually in that physical hill. We hope it's gonna be a little bit less, but there could be a little bit more. If we have to reduce by taking a 15 by 1 foot section of the side of the building off, it should have minimal effect on the overall storage. It should not affect at all the actual area where the truck will be in place, so that will continue to be the maintenance. Worst case scenario, if the storage got a little bit smaller, I'm sure the school district will find a way to make that work. But based on the proposed estimates that we put together, that's part of this bond, we don't anticipate that you'll ever lose the space for what it's really intended for. That's for a useful maintenance shed.
Thank you.
I know at previous meetings, we had talked about what happens, like, let's assume the bond's passed. And I know that we had discussed at previous meetings the possibility of a shared services initiative between the village and the school district, resulting in possibly finding a better location for village and district vehicles. What would happen financially to the money that we had put aside? I guess it's 705 for the behind the high school building, if that were to happen. Like, how does that operate?
So we can always spend less than the community voted, we just can never spend more. If we do spend, sometimes we can also transfer between the different projects, so that the resolution will be written so that you can actually make a transfer between projects. So if something, in the design project, we realize that something's way less money than we thought, and something else is more, we'll be able to do that type of transfer. So maybe there's something within that we maybe just could go a little fancier on, and opposed to what we thought we could do. So there is the provision to reallocate, or if you don't have to build it at all, we just don't spend that, and we save that money. We use it for something, and we take the debt off, and we put that back to our general fund budget for something else. So we just can't spend more. And so we are going to continue to look at the shared service piece of it with the village and hope for something there. But
Thank you.
And I would like to add, and we can't add a new project. Like, for example, modernization of some of the spaces. We can add to that, but we can't add a brand-new project that's not part of the bond.
Right, so, with having this part of the bond, we're planning for having to go forward with it. Obviously, if a shared services option becomes viable, we can explore that, but we don't want to be in a position where we don't have this as one of the projects and we don't allocate money for it in the hope that a shared services will materialize, since it has been something that we have looked at. It hasn't come to fruition yet. It doesn't mean we're not going to continue to try to see if that is a possibility, but since this is our time now to go out and address our needs, and this is one of our critical needs, we don't want to be in a position where we can't address that as part of this if we need to.
And there is an ongoing effort in our conversations with the village. I mean, this has been a greater need for the village, and they've been this is over the course of years, they've tried to organize and had conversations with different properties and entities. So it's just, it's a very challenging scenario. And, Dr. Harrison has reached out to other districts to see what opportunities are there. So we're constantly looking, and I think we're going to look to create a more formalized committee that's ongoing in terms of that aspect, but there's definitely not a reliable timeline that we can point to, or even a site that might be, useful. I mean, actually, that's one of my questions, is just in terms of the practicality of this current plan, which seems to be very good. And I would question if there's a location that's far away from our campuses, storing our mowers and such there for things that are being used on a daily basis. So,
I think a lot of it would be location dependent, and it may be that, if something was able to materialize, it may be more for vehicles than equipment, or equipment that's used infrequently, but the day-to-day equipment, it may not be practical to store off the campus.
that's right.
So.
So I had some questions too. I just wanted to follow up, if perhaps I could ask you, Gary. It seems to me sort of common sense that this decentralized approach would be would be better for your staff. But I just wanted to ask if you could share, does a single space for vehicle maintenance work for your crew and to have it at the high school, et cetera, versus having one at Lane or?
It actually does work at the high school because one of our groundsmen is a mechanic as well, and he's the one that does most of the repairs on the trucks, unless we send it out to, again, a garage or something. If we were to even partner with the village and they had a site, we would take our vehicle to that site as well. So as long as we can get it up to the high school, it's fine.
And in terms of attaching equipment, are there things, other than, what are the things that you have to attach to the truck? Or?
To the truck, the only thing we attach to the truck is the plow, and actually the salt spreader. The dump beds, they're part of the truck, the dump bodies. You can load up the back of the truck and go to the dump and just dump it off without having to shovel things off the truck.
And do you ever have challenges connecting or putting in place either of those items?
If it's cold out, yes. Yeah, we do. Or if something breaks.
So would plows be stored most likely up at the high school, or, if you run into some trouble?
There may be one still stored at Dow's, but the rest of them would be stored at the high school. Main Street actually has a shed, and they store theirs in that shed.
Okay. And are you able to pull a vehicle right up to the shed, or, in terms of if you're having a problem with one of those pieces of equipment and connecting it, I'm just wondering, like, are you having to do it out in the elements, or?
Right now we are, yes.
Yeah. And so that would still be the case with this?
Once we get the garage, it wouldn't be the case. We bring it up to the garage, pull it in the bay, and work on it there.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yeah, so again, this is now the rest of the list of the infrastructure projects, including the storage for athletic equipment, the replacement of the bleachers, the replacement of the fence, an outdoor bathroom at Dow's. There's two options there, either a standalone bathroom or attached to a building. We'll get to that later in the presentation. Repaving the basketball court at Dow's, painting the bell tower, and as well as adding an allowance in for some trees and landscaping to further beautify the campus and replace any trees that may have issues regarding any of the other projects. But we're not talking about the big beech tree down at Dow's Lane or anything like that. We're talking about things in other locations that we may need to replace for whatever reason.
Do we mention the basketball court anywhere else, or is this the spot to ask a question about that?
I just have a picture later.
Oh, okay. All right.
To that point, we're just seeking to resurface the court, the current.
Existing
Correct.
footprint.
The existing
Yep.
court will be
And-
resurfaced. We're not
Not making a new
building
court.
a new court, correct.
So since we're talking about, I just had a question, I guess, maybe, I don't know if Kevin or Veronica,
It's a shame.
in terms of what kind of equipment is used to repave? One of the reasons why we looked to recite the building was to not damage roots of that copper beech tree and some of the other trees. How would we go about resurfacing the basketball court without damaging those roots? Because I don't want to do that if,
Well, the machinery that they use to install asphalt is probably similar to the things that you've seen maybe on the highway. They are large machines that puts asphalt down, and then obviously there's a truck, the dump truck that comes with asphalt that fills the machine. The machine is moves around pretty well, it's on rubber tires, so I don't anticipate there being a lot of damage outside of the site where they're putting asphalt down, with the exception of maybe kicking around some of the grass that may need to be raked or reseeded.
would you have to dig into the ground, though, to?
Not at all. The intention is to go directly on top of the existing asphalt that
Okay.
is there. We do not intend on removing the existing asphalt.
So,
It's just an overlay of what is there existing.
so your belief is that the weight of the equipment and the fact that you're doing it over the existing would be safe for the root system of those trees?
Well, I don't see there being a large movement in the asphalt that's existing. that would displace any of the soils below it. That
So if
could
you,
cause-
because you're doing on top, right.
Could there be damage? There could always be damage. There could
Right.
be damage before we get there. I don't know what the current condition, I mean, I've seen it, it's beautiful.
Yeah. So you're not digging, and because you're not digging, you have the existing asphalt, so any vehicles that go on the asphalt, it's on asphalt, so, right. So,
I don't anticipate there being any extensive damage outside of it.
okay. Thank you.
Maura, I feel like we didn't give you a chance to ask that other follow-up question. Did you want to jump in before we move on?
It's a broader question about our process going forward. So we've seen what we've called representational images of what things could look like. We know that, we've got a certain budget we've got to work inside. And we know that we have members of the community here who probably want to still hear and nail down a few more details about their various projects. And I think that once, we get into the actual execution, assuming that we reach that point of these projects, it would be interesting to have some clarity about how community input on design, or, I don't want to go too far in that, but how do we know that the community still has a feeling that these projects are being executed in a way that we can all live with? Because my mind, and this is, so that jumping back from the facilities question tends to go to the way that this wall looks. That's the project that, I think everyone's in agreement that this is the time for a project like that to happen. But there are so many different ways it can, so that the design can impact it. And I think I'm hoping to understand how the process might work once it's in motion, that the community feels this is not just, that this is an appropriate piece of design for our community. That's, I guess, the simplest way I can say it. So I may have jumped a bit out of where we were, and if we want to talk about that later, I'm absolutely fine with it. But that's where my mind goes as we start to look a little broader about this project, the set of projects that we have.
I have a question about the tree.
Okay.
Hold that thought.
Yeah, hold on.
Hold the tree thought.
What, I have a similar question to yours, Maura, and I had thought maybe when we get to the list later on, that would be a good time. Could we talk about it at that point? Because I definitely want to have that conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Dave, tree?
Tree question?
Yes.
If I recall, we had a conversation that the repaving is more possibly detrimental to the tree than moving the cord. Am I remembering that correctly, or is it the other way around?
No, I think there was concern about
The removal.
the removal of the asphalt and what that could, and the
I think
digging.
we should check that, because I
No,
think you sent an
well,
email today that said something different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, Mr. Knowles and I actually met going back, I don't know if it was over break one day in February with Mr. Richardson from the commission, and we actually were down on the court itself. And the concern that he presented to us was if we actually went and removed the asphalt, that it would damage the surface level roots. And in his estimation, similar to what Kevin indicated, that if there was just a light milling or putting asphalt on top, he didn't foresee any challenges with the health of the surrounding trees.
So it sounds like the removal of asphalt could be a problem, but this is not that's not what's happening.
There's removal and then there's removal. If you do, like what you see on a highway where that machine comes in and tears it up and makes it rough, like to mill it. So, a light milling would our understanding would be
Think about the impact.
okay and not have impact, then you would go on top of it. If you came in with excavators to literally dig up the entire asphalt, which we're not contemplating, that could have implications. We don't, so we're going to stay away from that. and just do a light
Can I-
milling and a resurfacing.
Just for edification, I just want to read what he wrote about 2 hours or an hour ago.
Do you want to specify who we're?
The Alan Richardson,
Talking
the
about?
tree commission gentleman that Dr. Harrison just referenced. He said that if the BOE is considering resurfacing, grinding and resurfacing is a more difficult option. Paving machines are not lightweight, and it would not be a good idea to inflict further compaction of the root zone. If the court can be resurfaced without, and this is what I think you just said, Chris, right? The heavy use of, if the court can be surfaced without the use of heavy equipment, it may be feasible, but the use of heavy rollers to smooth the new surface would have a detrimental impact on the root zone. Lightweight grinding equipment may be able to accomplish the needed preparation, and there are smaller hand-operated rollers that could be an option. This is not the same type of machinery used to repave or resurface parking areas, et cetera. So but I think you just edified the comment, so I'm good.
I think the note that I would make is that we understand and we value that tree, and we all want to see that tree and the others surrounding the court survive.
Whatever we do, we're doing it with the tree.
So when, we talk about flexibility within the project, it's going to be our approach and the partnership that we have with our construction managers in identifying, what the exact approach is going to be. So if there's another look we need to take at it, we're going to do it, because I can tell you, when this project's done, all of us want to see that beautiful tree there, and we want to see it there decades from now.
Yes.
Thank you.
Larry,
I'm sorry, because we
just
can't
go
hear you.
to the-
Looking in my papers, yes, Sunday, Cornell makes permeable surfaces for dry pavement, so the water doesn't run off into the sewer, it goes straight down. And I was thinking about it just now, it came to me, that the pavement is cracked, and it might be a good thing that the water goes into the cracks that are there now, and it's kind of like a nice mellow scene there where the roots are going to the cracks. So I totally disagree with the gentleman. It's a very disruptive event to go with equipment to do the asphalt. So if we did it asphalt and did 80% non-permeable, and then 20% from Cornell's protocols to make a permeable membrane, then maybe we'll be working together on this so that the trees can get surface roots, direct water where the cracks are now. And that's just a thought. So in terms of design, there's inspired design, and that's what we're trying to achieve together.
Thank you.
So, I guess that would be the question, and it goes also to what Maura was saying, is that in terms of the design or implementation phase, I hope that you understand the concern, that you've budgeted the appropriate amount to do it in a way that would be sensitive, and that we'd have the opportunity, and we can talk about that more a little bit later in terms of making sure that we understand or are comfortable at the time forward that this is an appropriate process.
Yep, forward. So again, this is some of our examples of the paving that needs to be done. If we go next, our familiar picture of the Dow's Lane Library roof, which needs replacement, the girls' bathroom at the high school that needs renovation, repainting of the bell tower at Main Street School. Again, these are our current bleachers, which are outdated. The tower's in poor condition, so that tower will be removed, and we will then install new bleachers that are shown on this diagram here. As opposite the field, there'll be just one set of bleachers, and then the yellow box there will be our new area for the storage of our track and field equipment, as well as a small concession stand and some outdoor bathrooms. So that's the sketch for the proposed field building, which has been the same. This now ties back to where we started with our storage for our grounds and maintenance equipment. This is our current storage, and we obviously hope to improve that with the facility behind the high school. Again, more examples of our storage. Again, this is all of the different things that we could store. Obviously, we're not storing all of the trucks inside in this proposal, which is a departure from the initial recommendation, but And we've covered this, so we can skip ahead. So now we get to the outdoor bathroom at Dow's Lane, as well as the equipment shed. If you can see right there, that is the shed that will be right behind Dow's Lane, right by the district office. And then we have some potential locations for the outdoor bathroom. If we decide to attach it, it would be right there. If we decide to go with a standalone bathroom, this is the current thing in terms of the best location. I was gonna get to that with our next slide. So, here are, the two different ideas. Up here is the standalone bathroom, sorry, not the standalone, the one that would be attached to the school, and how that would work. And then this is just a representative example of a standalone bathroom. And, we're gonna look into, environmental concerns, and, whether self-composting toilets or other things are feasible. Those will be part of the consideration at the end of the day. But obviously, these here would tie into existing plumbing at Dow's Lane.
And you had, somebody had emailed us asking about another solution. You'd had a chance to look into that, the one from, the letter from Mr. Natarelli?
Yeah, actually, Veronica, H2M looked at it for us, and there was a suggestion that came from one of our community members that considered if we could leave a portion of the Dow's Lane building open and actually allow access to the buildings, but put up, blockades in the hallways, but it would not provide for us to be able to meet code and to have proper egress, let alone having school space open for wear and tear. So that it just wasn't, from the review that we had, it wasn't a viable option.
Okay.
So again, we talked about the repaving of the basketball court. This is the new location for the storage shed by the district office, which would be approximately 10 feet by 20 feet. And now it's the removal of the existing storage shed. So that's just what's represented here.
Yeah, again, all these pictures, because the light in this room makes it very difficult to see, but when you look at them on your own computer, you'll better. This is just the area. We haven't exactly pinpointed the specific location, Larry, but it's the area, and it's hard to take a picture at this point.
So we're looking straight at my house.
That's all the bamboo. You can't see it because of the light in this room right now, but that's all the bamboo screen that we have there. So it would be somewhere between the building and the bamboo screen.
I'm sorry, and we're not going to have a back and forth dialogue. In a minute, I'll allow you to come to the microphone and we can do that, but we need you at the microphone because anybody who's watching the video can't hear you. Yeah.
So go to the next slide.
All right, if there's a new section, I'd love to give you, Mr. Sheps, an opportunity to ask about it at the microphone, please.
Okay, so you're getting so comfortable that I don't even have to identify myself anymore. Thank you. So my feeling is, you get your money, you get the money, and then we meet as neighbors, and we work on the design of these facilities that impact my house. I'm more than willing to invite members of the community that are architects, that are in the facilities planning division, to work together. But I think going forward, we need to be, maybe even meet regularly on this. Like if you guys get the money, then we go, okay, well, how do we get this design? And rather than springing it on us so that I could have to squint and look in this, see what's going to happen to my potential property area, then I could be part of the design process, so it's a win-win. We need to play win-win. And right now, could I ask, has anyone on the board got any of my emails? Can anyone raise their hand?
Yes.
Yeah, everybody's got an email, because I've sent emails out since this began, and I haven't gotten a single board member's email back. So I feel isolated in my little half acre there behind the school.
We respond, Michael responds to the emails. You're not going to get emails from us.
All right.
Well, actually, I mean, that's not true. Because of the wonderful participation of our community, we've had a large volume of emails, and we've
One
had
person.
multiple trustees
Right, right,
responding,
right.
so that's been helpful. Thank you. But generally, we do respond. So I'm not aware of an email from you, Mr. Sheps, that, I mean, we can certainly search.
I have a list of all of them, I never saw them.
Yeah.
Were you sending it to the right address?
Yeah, I took it off the homepage, and when the
There's one from
Tempest
February
and
12th.
was going on over the location, I sent out a few emails. I sent a couple to Carol, and I never once got a single email from a board member, period. Categorically, I'm offended by that. And also, I think there's a new age coming on here, because I see the board, now you see who I am, I see you guys. We have a commonality here. We're a community. I don't have any neighbors except the school. The school has a lot of neighbors, but I live right behind the school. So this shed that's going to go up, I'd like to get very involved in the design, so that you're going to spend $88,000 on, I saw the budget line item, it's around $88,000. And then the bathroom is going to be $275,000. So $85,000 in the scheme of things, we're talking about $18 million budget. It's a little piece of the pie. So go get the money and involve me in it, so that I feel as though I'm winning and you guys are winning and the community's winning. For instance, I look at the back of the school that Brian said that's the back of the superintendent's wing there. I look at it as the back of the cafeteria, where our children go to, and they look out and they see the bamboo, and they see the dumpsters, and they see this loud air conditioner. And there's a little environment there. And what I'd like to do is go forward with the board to design a integrative zone there that the kids can benefit by eating and looking out, maybe playing or sitting outside, rather than saying, that's where all the industrial stuff goes. Because that industrial stuff, there should be a inspired design. And right now, we're dropping in placeholders. So I look forward to working with you. Can you guys, Michael, can you say, hey, you're right, let's do this together so that we can all play win-win?
Well, what I do want to say is that a little bit later in the presentation, as we discussed a few minutes earlier, I think we should have a discussion about the design and implementation phase. So when we get to that discussion, you'll hear our comments about it.
And I just want to add, we received one email from you saying, hi neighbors, and you specifically inquired about the condition of the storage shed. And we know that Gary and Carol had responded to you. So I just want to clarify if there are
There's
other.
been more than one.
Well, I'm just letting you know, that's all that we've gotten.
Okay, but
So-
I'm going to let you know that, in fact, rather than be finite about this and that, tit for tat, I think going forward, we just have to be more positive. Because right now, I feel like you guys never contacted me as board members on any of this process until it all got off.
Mr.
Yes.
Sheps, we acknowledge that publicly. Dr. Harrison acknowledged that. And
Duly
we said
noted.
we're sorry. So we're moving on. You've been part of the process. I know you've had conversations with Dr. Harrison, and you've been kept in the loop with this. So
Going
I just
forward-
want to make clear that, I feel like you're misrepresenting right now. Yes, there was a mistake initially made, and we've been doing.
Let's move beyond that.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not what I'm talking about is my property line is very close to the school, and going forward, I think we all need to work, if the money comes in, I'd like to be part of the process. Did I get that acknowledgement?
We will
Yes?
certainly keep you involved to a degree. It doesn't mean that you're the decision maker. We'll talk about what the process will be a little bit later, but let us get to that conversation.
I respect that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
I feel like we're sending mixed signals by allowing Mr. Sheps to talk and not anybody else.
Did
So
you-
are
did
we
you
gonna
did you have a question about that? Yeah, if you had a question about that section, absolutely, please go ahead. Yes, let me be clear, if anybody has questions related to what we were just talking about, please do
any of the items we've just discussed.
And this is just quick, and I've said it before, but I'll reiterate it. Well, hi, I'm Erin Bernstein. I'm the parent of a third grader at Dow's Lane. As I looked at the cost, and I might be a little bit off, but I just want to point out that we're spending 50% more, it looks like, per square foot on a building that's a third of the size of what we had originally designed. So I just want to throw that out there. I think some people had issues that we were spending $1.5 million on a 3,500 square foot shed. We're now spending $800,000 on a 1,200 square sheds in total. So I'm not saying I have anything wrong with that, but I think it's a lot more money to spend on a much smaller design per square foot. So I just want to point that out.
Thank you.
And I guess, does that mean it's a cap? So if we hit rock, obviously that's the cap that we'll spend.
And we've allowed for rock.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a
Yeah.
Can I follow up on that? I'm just curious. Does the decentralization it changes it, right? I think it's important for us to say that, Aaron.
Well, it's not just
It's because of the decentralization. When you
it's not just
decentralize,
that.
and there's other reasons, but I know that.
I'm just pointing out that
And we've said as much.
it's,
that we're spending 50% more per square foot for something that's a third of the size. That's,
and
What I'm saying
Yes,
is that's
but-
it's one of the results of accommodating the many requests to decentralize. I just want to make that clear for the camera.
absolutely, yes.
And that's why we originally proposed what we did on the
That's
first.
correct.
right, and it's also has to do with the fact that the cost of building at this site is more than the original proposed site. The reason, going back to our very first presentation, that we proposed the initial site was because from a building standpoint, it was the most cost-effective site to actually put a facility. Obviously, hearing community feedback, we've come forth now with a different location for the building, but, we had looked at this and other locations previously, as we said, and we arrived at the initial Dow site in part due to the ease of building at that site. But now moving away from that has led to the instance you've identified.
Any other questions before we move on?
And I guess it would be all the way, including security and this
Yeah,
up to this
everything
point.
that we've
Yeah.
discussed today.
I just had
think
one
that-
question that I should have asked a little bit before. Regarding the bathroom, if we look at page, let's see, 1 second, please. 37.
Is it what's displayed?
It's the one with it's the one we're looking at right there. Sorry about that. I'm just trying to understand, what classroom is that we'd be filling in the window? Is that a classroom that we'd be using as a classroom?
Those are like the offices where we have like what we call related services right now.
Uh-huh.
So they're not particularly classrooms per se, they're where students meet with psychologists and
To
other.
just the left of the library,
Yeah.
if you're standing outside, or the west of the library.
So actually.
So the
later-
first
later
one
on-
is like where we have meetings sometimes? It's like right to the,
Yeah, so you see on the bottom section over there, where it's like, looks a little octagonal there?
yeah.
That's the library that you're gonna see later when we talk about renovating the space.
Mhm.
So it's just before as you enter into that.
Okay, so the thing that's labeled classroom isn't actually used as a classroom.
Is it
The
like-
top one-
It really says office there, I'm not sure.
No,
if
on the
it's
top it
office.
says classroom.
Okay, well, because I think the architects don't always know exactly what we have in there. That's-
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
We can update that.
And can I ask just one question, Carol, on this, because we're putting two proposals on the table for the bathroom. Is the proposal for the bathroom that's attached to Dow's Lane at this point considered to be more expensive than the standalone? And could you explain that to the board, just so that everybody understands?
It's a little bit more expensive to do it this way. I would have to have Kevin or Veronica tell you why, but we have budgeted for the more expensive option, just in case that's how we end up deciding we want to go with this. So, plus if we decide to go with the other version, then we would just have a little more for landscaping, making it look pretty, or potentially the composting option, which also might be a little bit more money upfront.
And so it's to our advantage to have both options on the table so that the community fully understands that both of those are considerations, but depending on which is more cost-effective and which ultimately the architects and construction manager recommends, we'll go with that one.
Could I also, because I'm having trouble visualizing this in relation to the library, where the bathroom, proposed bathroom is attached?
Carol, you want to go back one slide?
So page
So-
37?
Somewhere, if you see it's right down
So
there.
where is this in relation to the existing outdoor classroom and the community garden?
Excuse me?
You have to go to microphone. Thank you.
Something here.
The outdoor classroom is
You can
probably
take it
right
off,
around
yeah.
here.
Okay.
Over.
The garden.
The garden, it's like the garden,
Right here is the library, and then there's that, W classroom that's right here.
Where is the doorway to the library? Please, thank you. So this is,
Right up against it.
it's right up against the garden.
Yeah, but
Pros and cons.
that's one of the disadvantages, but if we were to go with that route, we would try to look at how we would not either, I would say not lose that garden, or maybe potentially just relocate it slightly. So we do want the garden still.
So how, when that is, since, the garden is a part of the, it's a part of the classroom experience now for elementary school students, I just want to understand what would happen if this were chosen, sort of what the decision-making process would look like, so that kids would be able to have access to the garden for, I guess it would happen over the summer, so it would be relocated in time for.
yeah.
So more, I would say that's the same question.
You
that-
lose a
as we
season. I
are
think you
talking
lose a
about in terms
season.
of how we're going to make
Yeah.
decision-making, so I think we can
Yeah.
continue to address that as we go on. But yes, we're aware of that, and we want to all make sure we keep it.
So just circle that on the list at the end, the bathroom one, and then.
I'm keeping a list of all these items that we want to make sure we don't lose.
Thank you.
Carol, if we can jump ahead to 39. So again, this is the energy efficiency portion, which has remained unchanged. The only thing is that, as we talked about earlier, the LED replacement may be something that we look to put into the bond itself, but everything else here has remained the same. So, Carol, if we go next. These are just some of the pictures of the boiler that needs to be replaced at Dow's. Next, our univents, which are outdated at the high school, the cracks in the shade panels. So again, all the stuff we've talked about before. We had talked about this also at the first meeting. This was the air conditioning analysis. It hasn't changed. Obviously, it's just not cost effective to do central air throughout all of our buildings. So we've proposed adding AC to some of the common spaces at each school. So there's at least one air conditioning common space, as well as working overtime to add window units to our classrooms, so that over time, our classrooms will be fully air conditioned.
Just going back to that one, though, just to rethink that, based on the number you were showing before, couldn't we throw in a purchase of air conditioners?
Would that be?
Yeah, but that's not aidable because it's,
We can't do classroom air conditioners and get that covered in the bond, because
Yeah.
they wouldn't have a 15, 20-year lifespan.
Uh-huh, okay.
yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't told.
Yeah,
Yes, that's
okay.
what you're saying. Common spaces, yes, that would use central air.
But by putting the LED perhaps project into this would free up some money in our operating budget, which could pay for that.
Would accelerate that, yes.
It would accelerate the plan that we have.
Okay.
So, again, this is what we were talking about initially, to begin with the LEDs versus the upfront 875 versus the energy performance contract. So again, that's a consideration for the board that we can discuss. But one way or another, we're committed to seeing LEDs implemented. It's just a question of how we go about doing that. So again, these are some of the things that have been talked about in terms of the solar or alternative energy sources and some of the challenges that relate to those. Right now, we just don't think that solar is something that would be feasible given the cost and the need for new roofs that go alongside them. But throughout the process, we've looked where we can to be as environmentally friendly as possible. And that's obviously a goal of the district and something that we're going to continue throughout. But there's only so much we can do.
Well, and to that note, the continuing, I think, similar to the shared services, there's discussion about starting an ongoing committee in terms of sustainability.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly right, and we are committed to continuing to look at energy performance and how we can improve. Technology's coming out all the time, you know, we're constantly getting new information, and so I don't ever want to discount this, because, you know, we do want to do things, and even if we can't do it on a large scale, we want to do it on a small scale as an educational piece of it. So there's definitely something that we'll be recommending, I think, in the next year or so in terms of something like this. But to put it right now with this scope is too complicated, and it really sits outside of this, because the whole way you structure it is a lot different.
So if we go next, if there's any questions on this from the board before we move to the next topic.
Yeah, it's not, it actually links to this part, but also to saying in infrastructure, in terms of the Dow's Lane roof, has a decision been made? First of all, I don't know if it's a sloping or a flat roof, but what materials are going to be used for the roofing? And if it's material that you think that if we do eventually work on our other roofs for solar, it would be amenable to that kind of update in the future?
So it is a flat roof. It is a flat roof, and what we've budgeted for is an EPDM roof, which is a single high membrane, which is very typical of school district buildings. They typically have 20, 25, and 30-year warranties, and it is definitely a roof that can control.
Okay, thank you.
So again, this is the modernizing learning spaces portion of the presentation. This is really unchanged from what we've done in the past. So we'll go through this. I mean, these are the main areas that we've talked about. We have the. Let's go ahead, Carol. This is Dow's Lane, where we're looking to reconfigure the library and deal with some dedicated PLTW space. Go next. I think we have some current pictures of what those spaces look like, and then if we go ahead, again, how we're going to renovate the computer room and convert it to a PLTW space. Next, and then these are, I think, some of my favorite stock photos, because I really like the nook in the wall there where kids could sit and read, but these are just some examples of spaces that other buildings have used, and which we'll look to incorporate in design a more flexible environment for the Dow's Lane Library. So now we turn to the campus library, which many of us walked through to get here tonight, and we've talked about how we want to modernize that space as well. We have here the blue and orange areas where the idea would be to try to create a quiet zone and a more collaborative working zone in the library with a glass partition to separate them. And again, just like at Dow's, removing some of the fixed furniture to allow a more flexible placement and more flexibility just in how the space is used. Go next. Again, also talking about the top portion of the library, again, having more some dedicated individual space there for individuals to study, and then also some office space up above, which could be used for meetings and so forth. Again, here just some examples of some of the ideas. Also, again, just illustrative stock photos so people could see what we're talking about. This is now the Main Street School, and turning the existing PLTW classroom into a more functional space by removing the fixed high tables that many of us remember from science class when we were younger, and then also to renovate the computer lab to make it a more 21st century space, given the type of devices we now have as opposed to the fixed fixed desktops that we used to have.
I have a question about that real quick, just in terms of upgrading the technology.
Can you pull the mic closer as well?
Yeah, sorry. When you talk about upgrading, the technology in the library, I just wondered about, is there any plans to bring in like a smart board or some kind of like things like that, like to really modernize and make it, because it's not the librarian job anymore, it's the
Smart
media.
board.
There is, okay, good, good.
Yeah, each one.
Good,
And
just
we
to
would
really
continue
like.
to plan for that. A lot of it also is electrical upgrades to to accommodate, the new wiring and everything else that we would need.
So it would be
Which hasn't been
set for
invented
whatever.
yet by the time this gets finished. This is gonna be something that new.
So we had, so again, these are more stock photos of what a more modern space would look like with more flexible furniture. Go ahead. Again, we've talked about this before, our storage for our art and music classrooms, which currently are bereft of good storage solutions, and we're looking to augment that. So here are just some ideas of what we would be looking to do for both our music and art rooms. Skip ahead. So again, now, back to the dollars portion of the presentation. This is where we started with the borrowing amounts, and again, we were talking about staying, in that lower portion of the range, even though the way rate projections are going, we think we could stay in that upper portion. We're looking to be conservative and stay in the lower portion of that range. So, again, the recommendations without the LED is just about 18 million. And if we were to add the LEDs in, you'd have about another 875,000 on that. And here's our breakdown by category. As you can see, there you have safety, security, infrastructure is the biggest expenditure, and both energy efficiency and modernization are about the same.
And the energy efficiency jumps up if we agree to the LED. That's not included in that figure.
Not yet,
Not yet.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Can you just slide back to the pictures?
Sure.
The one of
Which
the
one?
band room? Yeah. Just want to go back, yeah.
Yeah.
Can we please not let that happen again? In making an investment like we're about to make to fix spaces and do things like that? Just wanted to make
I
that
think
comment.
that's the whole intent, that's the whole intent
I
of the
know, but
project.
it doesn't need to be like that even in the current state, is
Well-
kind of my point. So
No, but it does, because there's nowhere for it to go.
we started again.
Okay,
The music
okay.
room,
All right,
just
all right,
like
all
no
right.
shelves. Didn't look like that.
You're talking to a principal who,
Okay.
So here's our spending by location. So obviously, there's been a shift between the Dows and campus, given the movement of the storage facilities, but otherwise, still roughly the same as the initial presentation. Go next. So now, here's where we have all of the detail for each project and the costs. Again, other than the garage, that's where the main change between what was previously presented and what we now have here. There are a couple other things that we've done, so which the right slide. So here, given our needs at the campus with the bathrooms, the girls' bathroom is the most pressing need, but there are other bathrooms that certainly need to be renovated, so we've now put in an allowance for bathrooms. So our goal would be to obviously address the girls' bathroom that needs it first, but then try to do a couple other bathrooms at least at the same time. That would also have the advantage that if you're bidding out a bathroom, you're hopefully going to get a better price if you tell them you can do 4 bathrooms versus just 1. So we're going to look to try to leverage that in the project as well, and try to address some of our other needs that would otherwise have to be addressed in the ordinary budget year over year. And given our limited capital funds on a yearly basis, we've now decided to put in the allowance for the bathrooms.
So that line where it says additional cost to move basketball court area, we're just striking that line?
Where are we looking?
Oh, so that's really just to repave it. I should have changed the wording, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm reading it
Not to
correctly.
move,
Yeah,
it's
I
just
understand it
to
correctly.
repave it, yeah.
Repave, not move.
Yes.
I'll make that change. I'm sorry.
Right, okay, I just want to make sure.
Yes. So, again, here's all of the infrastructure total. If we go next, we have all the costs for the energy efficiency, replacing the boiler, the different air conditioning of the various common spaces, the univent controls in the classrooms, and the actual control system for that. So, and then here's our estimates for the modernization of the learning spaces and all of the projects associated with that. And we should say that, all of our estimates include soft costs, so that includes allowances for architecture fees, engineering fees, the escalation in cost between the time that we're talking now versus when these projects are actually built. So that's what we're talking about when we have soft costs listed there. So as we've talked about on and off, the second option is the addition of the LEDs for an additional $175,000, and we went through the advantages and the issues at the beginning. To the extent there are further questions at this point, the board, I'd invite other questions on that piece of it. And then we can open up to whatever other questions as we talk about the timeline.
Good job, Brian, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, you have a question there?
Yeah, I have a couple, just questions on the detailed project costs.
Sure.
So if you go to page 65 and you look at row 1, I just think it should be corrected to say new high school entry and vestibules for IMS and IHS, because it's not that clear.
It's not actually. That's purely the high school entry. There's a separate.
Yeah, where's the vestibule for?
There's a small
Oh,
piece of it from.
you're right, you're
That's
right.
right, there's a very small.
Thank you.
There's very minimal work that needs to be done to the middle school.
Right,
because
so
it's
it's, yeah, but just to make it clear on that row.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to make that clear, because otherwise it looks it's just for the high school entry.
Thank you.
And the vestibule there, because, well, you guys agree. And also, I haven't seen a rendition on enclosing the walkways for Main Street School. So I'd like, even if there's no image, is there sort of a verbal description of what's planned to be done?
Yeah, at this point, it's really more of an allowance to see how we would do that.
Mhm. Oh, sorry, page 65, row 3.
Did we talk about that?
Yeah, right now, there's just an allowance for that. It's something that we're going to look at, but there's been no design work done on that.
So it's like a placeholder to make sure we can
Yes.
spend it if we need to.
We talk about that at all?
If we need to, or it absolutely will be done.
Well,
I thought it was.
we can have probably Veronica speak to that a little bit, because she did look at the site. No matter what, there's work that needs to be done in that connecting area. And then, we put an additional allowance amount to enclose it. But would you mind speaking to that for a few minutes?
About between the gym.
Between the gym and Main Street School. Mhm.
So yes, there is a budget, about $150,000 for the hard construction cost, I believe, for the work between Main Street School, is it not?
That's it. I'm going to get it.
But you'll just-
It doesn't sound, it says it's on, but it doesn't.
Is it on?
Here.
Thank you.
Switch.
That's definitely on.
So there is an allowance to do repairs to the sidewalk between the Main Street School and the gymnasium building. There's some cracks in the foundation in the actual sidewalk and in the stairs, so part of that is for those repairs. And we've talked about some different options for enclosing it, but nothing has been finalized for that yet.
Thank you.
Bless you. It's my understanding that because the theater building, the village may be doing something with the theater building, and there may be an opportunity to incorporate some of that work that connects the two buildings together, your two buildings together. So that's why it was just a budget, not something specifically designed at this point.
And also, there's the aspect of that's a egress, that's like a way that the community actually crosses.
Maybe there was something that would be left open
Yep.
during the weekend, but
Right,
still
outside
keep
of
the
school
doors,
hours.
Keep it closed inside of it, like,
Right,
there's a lot of
because
things.
as we've said, when we have lockdown situations, that allows kids to go from the main building over to the gym, but I just hadn't seen that before until today, so thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions on this right now?
Lord, thank you.
I do have a question about the cost, which is that I want to take advantage of the fact that Kevin's here. You did a great job previously, but could you again explain for folks out in the community, they're like, but I would spend X on my house. Why is it so much more expensive to do it through, when it's a school project? Could you talk about how you estimate the cost again, and why it might seem expensive to the average taxpayer?
So there's like a lot of questions there, all wrapped into one sentence. You're bound by the Wicks law as a public facility. As a public facility, you tend to have your costs more expensive to do work here because you have to pay prevailing rate. Where you're at home, you don't have to necessarily pay that. It's a negotiated flat fee. Here, you're bound by Wicks law, which is the lowest responsible bidder, so you're bound by whatever that cost is. So I think that hopefully answers that first question. The second question was,
Just in terms of the process by which you estimate costs.
so there's a number of ways that we estimate costs depending on where we are in the development of the design drawings. So right now, the way that we've done it, Triton Construction has been in the industry working in school districts for 17 years. I've been doing that. I've been doing it myself personally for over 25 years. I have a lot of experience working all through the Hudson Valley and Long Island, and so does the company. Because of that, we have a very large database of costs from projects that have bid in this area and outside this area. So that's one of the ways that we figure out what your individual costs are going to be, is just from an experience of how things have been bid out in the local area. The second way is that, and as we move forward, it gets even more detailed, is that we'll actually meet with other consultants, meet with other contractors, get physical pricing for some specialty-related items so that we make sure that as we move forward, we're using real numbers and not numbers that are done in gross square footages like we are now, right? So right now in this process, everything is very vague. The drawings are very schematic in nature. The costs are very much in gross square footages. That's because we don't have all the details to be able to make finite cost analysis for estimating purposes. As we move forward, we will be able to do that. And to kind of piggyback on a question that came up in terms of schedule earlier, the architect is going to be in front of the board at various stages of design completion so that they'll be doing presentations on where you are and more defined drawings and specifications. The first time after the bond's approved would be what they call SDs, or schematic design development drawings, which means they're about 30% complete. They'll make a presentation to the board and to the community to make sure we get enough feedback that's what everybody is looking for. It gets approved for them to move forward into what's called design development. Design development will complete the documents till about 60%. They'll come and meet with the board again in an open presentation to the public so that we can get feedback on where we are with the design. And then the final will be CDs, or construction documents, which are about 90% complete documents, in which cases they're really, really defined. We've gone through all the user groups, everybody's weighed in on it, and then at completion of each one of these stages, we also provide an updated estimate to make sure we stay within the bond amounts that were approved by your community. So there's a lot of work that will take, a lot of other estimates and a lot of other presentations of this project that will take place over the course of the next 9 or 10 or 12 months after it's approved by your voters. Okay.
Thanks, Kevin.
Did you have any other questions that you?
Well, so I mean, I guess on the one hand, you might, in terms of different considerations, we would like to hear that it's less expensive, but then on the other hand, because it's an estimation at this stage, are you being somewhat more conservative?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to be, right? Based on our knowledge and experience, we try and fill in all the gaps. All the areas that are gray, we try and make black or white and incorporate those costs directly into your estimate. Why is it 50% more? There's a number of things that I mean, you know, it's there's a volume and scale. The smaller you go, the more things tend to cost. But also the location that it is in has a rock situation where the other one didn't. So with some foundation walls and some waterproofing to keep the building dry that we didn't have. And like you mentioned, very well put, is that the Dow's Lane, the original location was the most efficient, feasible location. This is perhaps the second, but because of it, there's the cost of it.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful, I appreciate it.
Carol, I had a question. When we presented this scope of work, we broke it down into the 4 areas: safety and security, infrastructure, energy efficiency, and modernizing learning spaces. I could see part of the community having a question as to how it works once this is all lumped together and we vote on the total amount. I'm curious if, for example, as Kevin stated, if items under safety and security come in much lower, can we take that money and use it towards another category, energy efficiency or infrastructure? And I think it may be worthwhile for the board and the community to hear that. So the money isn't fixed in each of the groups. We can, once it's approved, we can find the most cost-effective method and allocate.
Let Veronica talk. Yes, yes.
So yeah, so you're voting on, or the public is also, voting on the total bond amount. The specific line items can shift around within that. The only thing that we need to do is we have to identify what the actual specific project is, because the way it gets submitted to the State Education Department is by building. And so ideally, you submit it by building, you get a building permit for that building project, and then you bid it out that way.
We're actually filing what's called a letter of intent with the SED on each of the different areas. You still can make changes to that, but you're filing that letter of intent, and then assign a project number, and then you're going to make the changes. So it is a fluid process. They do understand that things will change.
Is it, in terms of the fungibility, is it more difficult to shift it from one building to another based on the way it's submitted, or?
You can shift funds, but you can't shift, like, I couldn't say, okay, now we're going to go bait and switch and build that building somewhere else, because we haven't, that we wouldn't be able to do, because we've identified a location. That's part of our seeker analysis, so we can't then go and say, okay, now we change our mind and tell the community, we did that just so you can vote. We can't do that. But we can allocate money. So if the building at the high school is less than we thought, we could put that money somewhere else. And if it potentially could go into the library renovations at Dow's or something like that. So that we can do. Because the specific dollar amount is a budget. Just like our general fund budget, you can make some changes within it. You just can't exceed it, right?
So what happens if you dig into that behind the, you go to grade the thing behind the high school, the mound?
Bedrock.
The bedrock. Thank you for that geological term. And you run into something, I don't know what you might run into, but something that is immovable, or it ramps up the price of that particular portion of the project well above the 17 million or 18 million. Like, it's another like $800,000 or something, that because of some weird rock formation. Like, what happens in that instance?
Well, so a couple of things. We would have to do a geotechnical survey of that site after the vote. And that will tell us what we actually have under the mound.
So what does something like that cost? Is that in the plan?
That's part
It's
of
all
the
part of the
budget.
geotechnical survey, what's it called?
Yep,
Geotechnical survey.
Geotechnical report.
I don't want to be in on
The
that.
second part of that is, so we have the geotechnical report. The second part of that is we have a construction contingency that is also built into here, so that's what that is
Got it.
for unforeseen conditions.
So it's built in already. The idea of that is built into the plan already.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the soft costs.
It's in the soft cost, no, that's, okay.
In the
Got
budget,
it.
there's a certain percentage of dollars that are set for just for these types of conditions.
Thank you.
But it's true to say that if there is some unforeseen something we discover, and it makes it perhaps cost prohibitive, then it comes back to the board, and we have a very public conversation.
About how to deal with it.
And weigh the pros and the cons, and we have a public conversation.
So the process is in place, God forbid anything happens to that effect. Got it, thank you.
So to circle back to the very good question that Maura had brought up earlier, is the process that Kevin shared the process?
I would step back. I think the broader scope of the process can be whatever the board wants it to be. I think what Kevin stated and Veronica confirmed is like their official design process. So when we step back and think about it, the board can have a conversation about concepts and designs and look for other layers of engagement and dialogue. It's nothing where we have our team run off and design and come back. No, we can discuss parameters, we can discuss design options, and the board can design that process however it wants. So that can be, you know, Buildings and Grounds Committee with a broader group of folks. When we're talking about our learning spaces, like just as, you know, we're talking about community space and the aesthetics outside, when we're getting inside the school, we want our educators influencing that. So we want, if we're in Dow's, we want to get feedback from the staff that work in Dow's, right? We want our media library specialists to be influencing what happens in the libraries. So it's really to the board and how we look to shape what that process looks like.
Right, and also, you know, once the money is approved and the design process starts, it's going to be a more defined process because you can actually see what it's going to look like our space as opposed to just some stock photos. We'll be able to have that fleshed out more once we can actually start spending the money on the design process.
Right. So, I mean, it's great that there's already these, I guess, 3 or more points that are articulated, but I do think it would be good to have a process that allows stakeholders in the board to see and provide feedback about design along the way. It sounds like it might be best, along with that thought that because they are sort of building specific, that maybe to do it in a way that relates to, you know, Dow's Lane or Main Street School or the campus in terms of the bringing in student, staff, and community. Is that, are there concerns or opportunities that?
Well, I mean, I think as Veronica and Gary and Kevin laid out, you know, there's going to be, at a minimum, these regular touch points where they come back with designs where there'll be, you know, opportunity for feedback and comment. And as the design process moves forward, you know, there'll be options. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what it is you're envisioning in terms of the process, you know, beyond that, where there'll be public meetings, where there'll be presentations made, and the board will have a chance to weigh in and ask questions, as well as who's ever in attendance.
Well, that's why I guess I'm not sure either. If, you know, at the 30% stage, is that still a chance for folks to say, oh, this, you know, there's a clear response from the board and community, oh, we'd like it to go a different direction. Is that still a stage?
And Michael, I think a lot of it will depend on the things we're doing. I mean, I don't think there's going to be a need for a large committee to work on the roof. That's a standard roof. But to do the modernizing learning spaces, yes. To do the things that impact our neighbors, yes. So I think we have to step back and
depends on the project.
and design a process that's going to work within the scope of what we're dealing with, so that we're not spending an inordinate amount of time doing some of the simpler things like the boiler and the roof and things like that. But things that certainly have an aesthetic effect and we want to improve design, certainly we need to have some committee and create a process. And I think we have ample time to do that between now and after the vote as they get going. So we don't have to decide that exactly tonight. I think we just have to recognize that we want that and that we are committed to that.
And also, I mean, I think, you know, we'll have to be guided by our architects in terms of, yeah, at what point is that process ripe for the commentary? I would think if you're at 90% construction-ready drawings, that's probably too late, is my guess.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm getting at, yeah.
And, you know.
But there are going to be multiple opportunities before that, is the
Yes.
point.
Right, and you will set that tone. You guys will make that decision as to how you want that to be. We don't have to decide that this minute. We just, you know, we need to get to that point where we can move forward, so.
Right, and to clarify, I think the soft cost part of the budgeting process is the part that sort of encompasses our ability to have that procedure.
Right, includes the design and all of that.
Veronica, yeah.
So, by the time we are at 30% documents, which is the schematic design phase, you'll have a good understanding of what the floor plan looks like, and I'll get an example, what the floor plans look like, what the elevations look like, or what the outside of the building is going to look like. You'll have an idea of what the materials are going to be. So you'll have a sense of what the project is going to be at that point. That's really and then at the end, and you'll have an idea of what the the budget is a more accurate now budget for that specific item, just as we talked about before. The numbers can move around within the 17 million, it just can't exceed that $17 million number. Once we get past, we won't move beyond that 30% until we have the approval of the district to move past that percentage. Once we get past that percentage point, or that's when we want to that's the point where we want to finalize the look of the building, because at that point then we need to start producing the actual construction documents, and we need to meet the schedule that's been discussed in terms of getting the documents up to the state education department. So it's really at that, say, 0 or 1 to 30% where we make the changes. But you'll have a very good understanding by 30% on what it's going to look like.
Right, so it sounds like to the degree that we have a process that involves stakeholder feedback, it would be in that.
It's in the beginning.
In the beginning.
Yep.
Are there, I mean, does everyone feel comfortable? That's been important. You know, there's clearly examples that we have in terms of the Dust Bowl, the decision not to build a new structure on the west side of Mazzaro's Field, the barriers which we're adjusting to do something else outside of the high school. So there's any number of examples where we'd like, or where we've interceded and done something different. I just want to make sure that we're all comfortable as a board, and that we feel like we're giving the community the chance to weigh in as well.
I would just add the dollar value and the aesthetic impact of some of these changes that we're talking about making here are considerably more substantial than, for example, those bollards that we put up at the high school, or you know, even the treatment of the Dust Bowl, the former Dust Bowl, or you know, we're talking, I guess, what I'm saying is that for a large part, the prior bond had big projects which were, I mean, it was no question how you would do a new field and drainage. You know, there wasn't that same aesthetic need for flexibility, I guess.
And it's pretty spelled out, actually, because of the situation that we had there where
With DEC.
DEC, so, yeah.
And then in the case of, I mean, the track, I mean, that is, you know,
People can all visualize a track, right?
exactly. So, you know, and still the materials were a very important community discussion.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is the community we have, and you could bet that they will want to have some ownership, I think, of what they're spending, is how I would put it.
You know, I think back to, before what you said, Ms. Schetz, about design and all that. Something that we did with the logo, when you brought the logo design to the students, it really created quite an atmosphere. I wonder if there's a way, one of these projects, or maybe a few of these projects, could really include the students in that design process, you know, in a way that they feel the ownership of it, and have that real sense of student buy-in into the community. Because, I mean, we did it, and it was pretty awesome.
I think one thing that we've talked about rather informally is when we think about the outdoor bathroom options at Dow's, that there's some real opportunity to be creative if we do a freestanding bathroom, and looking at different environmental functions and design features that I think could really engage a number of different corners of the community, from our kids all the way to the pros in the community that have the experts and the ideas.
Thought about you.
Yeah.
But I guess just a little more clarity, when we talk about, when we hear about the board approving, is that, I know that some things should be a lot easier, that we don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about the roof or this or that, but we're still voting to approve it at those different stages that were described. Okay. So there's not things that are in or out in that process, it's all in. Okay.
And I just want to,
Things are a little bit quicker and easier.
Yes.
I just want to clarify that in addition to the aesthetic design issues, as we continue, assuming that the bond is passed, that there'll be like an environmental stewardship duty that continues with the board. For example, we talk about the oil-water separators for the building behind the high school. We talk about landscaping, which isn't only an aesthetic issue, but can enable enhanced energy efficiency. And I think the board will continue to provide stewardship for those items as well. Thank you.
As well as they did, because they don't really let you, you know, those 90% construction drawings that are going up to the state, they will come back to several million comments if you don't, you know, do those things. and Veronica will well know. Yeah.
Okay,
It will
thank
come
you.
back, and you need to have it right, so, yes.
Yeah.
I missed asking one question, which is, before, when the facilities building was proposed at the court on Dow's Lane, that included work on drainage, which is an existing issue. If we're not building a building there, are we still planning to address the drainage issues in which water is going over into the next property, the Half Moon North Co-op?
I don't think we did, no, because we really weren't, no.
Because that's been brought to your attention that that's an issue. So I'm just wondering, that was.
Where, at the high school, or?
No, at the basketball
At Dow's Lane, we're talking about at Dow's Lane, there's a drainage issue, because it's on a hill down to next property. And so that was raised earlier with the facilities building, that there would be a drainage component.
Because we were putting a building, we would have had to done
Yeah.
the drainage,
Yeah.
but we're not doing a
So
building.
I guess now, if you're talking about doing a basketball court, have you included any consideration of drainage in that project?
No, it has not been, discussed at B&G, and it wasn't on the original list that we looked at, but this is the first.
I'm sorry, then the intent is
It's not the
to do
first. I
additional
raised it at
excavation.
the February 7th meeting.
But Michael, I'm not understanding your question. We told you how we came about this presentation. It has to be generated at B&G, and it had to be generated in the original list. So
Right.
it's not on the list to
I
address
understand.
drainage.
That's because of the shift, there was a building that was going to be placed there, and that was going to address drainage issues. Because it's not, now you have a different project, which is repaving the basketball court. There's an existing drainage issue, and certainly if there's going to be work there, I would think that the drainage should be addressed as well.
I believe that the comments before about addressing the drainage was addressing the drainage, as Carol noted, for the specific building that was proposed at that location,
Yeah.
not other drainage issues that may be in that area. And with the new proposed work of just essentially resurfacing the existing asphalt basketball court, the intent is not to excavate that area, so without excavating, it would be difficult to address some other drainage issue, which wasn't previously discussed.
It has been shared with the district on a handful of occasions, including a recent letter. So,
But is this part of B&G? I'm not following this, because if it didn't generate through B&G, regardless of if there's something else
the
that
letter was sent to B&G, and facilities have been contacted in the past about drainage issues.
No, do not recall that. But if you want to bring it back, we'll take a look at it. But I cannot,
I'm going to ask Mr. Knowles, have you been contacted by the property about drainage issues?
Gary, good, Mike?
I have to.
Was a while back for, is that North?
Half Moon North, yeah.
Half North. And we did address that. We put in a new catch basin on the north end of the basketball court. And I believe Don Wilson was the person that I was back and forth with, and he seemed to think that addressed that problem. Now, we do have heavy, we have some monsoons that we've been having in the past, and we do get runoff for that, but your normal rainstorm, I haven't had any issues in quite some time.
Okay. Well, I'll see if they need to contact you then, if they haven't contacted you recently about it.
And that brings a good point, because the amount of rainfall has severely increased in the last couple of years, and I certainly changed the water table around where my house is, so I imagine it's changed the water table.
Water
in a lot
goes
of places.
down.
Well, no, but I mean, like, the amount of water, like, in my backyard, it never pooled,
Yeah.
ever. And now it pools because there's too much water in the ground.
My backyard, too.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'll call you about that, Carol.
Mine free.
Is the board done with questions? Should we open it up to the community?
Yeah, and just as a reminder to the board, there is, beyond the overall general support, there is the question related to LED lighting, to make a determination on tonight.
Yeah, well, and I do just want to say, before we close, thank you to Gary Knowles for his input throughout the process, and Carol Stein as well for all of the work that went into putting together these presentations, and obviously our partners at H2M and Triton for their help along the way and guidance, which has certainly been appreciated and helpful throughout the process. So,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure working with
Yeah,
everybody.
Are we talking about the lighting now, or are we waiting to talk about the lighting?
I think we should make a decision before we.
I have a question about it.
yeah.
Well, what's the question and more comment? I feel like, I mean, I think rather than provide the one number, I would like to see multiple numbers from different people who do the LED work, because
That would be the bidding process, so when we look at that figure.
that's
this is-
just the money that we're okay, got
Yes.
it.
That's an
Be-
allocation.
Got it.
Because we know we have at least one bid that would come
So
in at
X
that
amount of
number.
dollars is here, we
Yes.
get the bids, and
Yes.
I got it, thank you.
You know, but, you know, again, we want to make sure we go with a company with experience in schools and that have,
I just would like to see that
Yes.
process.
yeah, and that's for all of these projects, but.
Okay. How do you want to start this conversation?
Do you want to take questions at all?
Well, we're going to do the LED piece first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I guess, I don't know if there's further questions from the board.
How much of the money did we save from the 3,500, moving from 3,500 square feet to 1,125, 1,150, whatever it is? We saved a bunch of money in that decentralization. How much of that savings is, do you know off the top of your head what percentage of the savings is going towards that LED?
None.
No,
We added
added
some
the other
projects.
items.
We added the bathrooms, the fencing, we added things.
Right, but
into
what-
That
what-
LED piece was original and not as part of, because we're
No,
adding
no,
it tonight.
no, let's step back, let's
Part
step
of it.
back. No, I want to say, calculating wrong, that we were at about 18.4 when we did the first presentation. So now we're at about 18, just call it 18. So that's about 400 and change less. So some of that would go towards the LED and some of it would be additional, because if we do the LEDs in
Some of the soft costs.
no, that's not the soft cost. It's a pure, when you took out the garage, that reduced the amount.
Took it down by 2 million.
Right.
No,
Not,
around
no,
2
no,
million.
no,
1.7.
no. No, probably
We added 800,000 back in for the.
for the
other
smaller,
things,
for the
so-
smaller facility.
1.2,
No, because it wasn't that much to begin with.
1.7, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got a
So
ballpark.
some of that went to an allowance for the additional bathrooms at the high school. Some of it went to the allowance for the walkway, but we're still about 400,000 or so less than what the initial proposal was. So if we went with the LEDs in the bond, we'd be going from where our initial proposal was about 18.4 to now 18.8, if we include the LEDs in. The LEDs were always going to be a project. When we did our initial presentation on the 7th, it was 18.4 plus doing an energy performance contract to fund the LEDs.
Now it's under 18.
Now,
and
well,
it's
now,
inclusive
because,
of-
no, not inclusive, it would be 18 without doing the LEDs in the bond. It would be 18.8 if we include the LEDs. Our goal was to always stay below the $19 million threshold, which
Got
was
it.
our top-end
Understood.
borrowing. So we couldn't put the LEDs in with all those initial costs. Now with everything moved around, we believe the LEDs would fit comfortably within our borrowing target to include it in the bond if we so choose to do so.
So you're proposing, instead of the 17, let's say 8, let's call it 8, we're saying, let's call it 9, 19.
It's 18,867.
Inclusive of the LEDs.
All in it.
Yes.
Maybe
Right?
it'll be an exact number in the resolution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm not
So-
concerned, I'm not concerned about the difference between the number
Right.
necessarily. When you showed us the borrowing information.
We're still tax
Yeah,
neutral.
we're still tax
Yes.
neutral, but I got it.
Yeah.
I'm clear, thank you.
And I guess the only point that we're trying to emphasize is that we represented to this board as a B&G committee that we would stay under 18 million, but upon reflection, once we recalculated the numbers, decentralized the garage, we thought it was in the best interest to bring before the board the LED cost, which takes us above the 18, but still keeps us at tax neutral. But we thought it should be a board decision to make sure you're comfortable going over 18. If you're not, this is the time to talk.
And also, you know, the LEDs have the unique advantage that it will generate savings over time
Much, a lot of money.
from electricity, and
A lot of money.
so, you know, it's a little bit of a unique item, which B&G has been committed to throughout. Implementing, it's just a question of how we get there.
I mean, I think when you have a big decision like this, no one should feel rushed. It shouldn't even be a yes or no. If anybody's feeling rushed about the decision, I think, in fairness, that's a consideration. It's a big decision.
I'm okay.
I can't imagine anyone's going to feel rushed at this point because we are closing in on that deadline.
I'm sure that you feel that way, but anybody else who wants to express that, we should give them that opportunity.
Yeah, no, I'm not feeling, do you feel rushed?
I don't feel rushed.
Do you feel rushed, Michael?
No, I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
I think we're good to go. Do you,
But,
it's just
I mean,
being
I-
fair.
I would just observe that we did have some moving pieces here, and this is a change in how we think about the LED costs, but it seems like there's only positives that I'm seeing
Yeah.
here.
Yes.
I mean, the sooner we get it done, the sooner we realize those savings,
Remaining taxation
so,
is-
exactly.
And also, by doing through the bond, we believe we'll get a lower borrowing cost on that project
Exactly.
than if we do it through an energy performance contract, which includes an embedded financing cost in it.
It's a no-brainer.
So let's eliminate the financing, the embedded financing costs for heaven's sakes.
Okay, so,
Do we vote on it?
everybody's on board with adding LED lighting?
I think so.
Okay.
Second option.
So I will change the resolution, the draft resolution to add it in.
Very good.
Thank you.
So if anybody has any questions related to the presentation, I invite you to go to the microphone, which I hope works, and share your name.
Hello? The air conditioning of the gymnasium at Dow's Lane, where is the condenser units going to be for that system?
On the roof?
Perfect, okay. And then speaking of roofs, the green roof of the roof of the library, can that be converted to a green roof if we have the structural loads that can handle it? You need about 15 pounds per square foot.
I'd invite Veronica to speak to it, because we did have some conversation about it, because there were structural and design concerns that were cost prohibitive.
Yeah, so we, when we looked at the cost of a green roof, it was almost double the cost of what a non-green roof would be, budgeted at. So at this point, it's not in the budget.
Is the structural load of the roof okay to handle a green roof?
We have not done the structural analysis yet to determine whether or not it was, because we already understood that the cost was almost twice the amount, just for the roofing, the green roof itself, not even including any structural enhancements that may be needed.
Right, because there's like state aid that can be picked up for that type of project. Have you looked at that?
We have not yet, it's something that we should work with the district on, though.
Yeah, and may
And
I
then
add?
the new boiler that's going in to Dow's Lane, is that, can that be integrated with like heat pumps from the air conditioner that will heat the gymnasium? Is that the type of air conditioner that has a heat pump or to save energy costs?
Right now, that boiler is not designed yet. It's budgeted for based on the load that's needed, but our engineers will work with the district on making the most energy efficient boiler boiler plant that's, in the budget.
Okay. I just want to thank the board. I'm on board with this budget. You guys done your homework and you listened to the community, and I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Really appreciate your engagement, your patience, your questions, and thank you to the B&G committee. I really
I echo
appreciate.
that.
Yes,
the-
thank
it's
you.
been
Amazing.
a long time, there's a lot more to
Lot of
do,
fun.
but
Yeah, but I gotta say, you guys, you really did an incredible job.
Yeah.
All around the board.
and thank you, and congratulations on your recent success in your neighboring district of Hastings, and hopefully, well, there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, don't. Yeah. So just if I could say that as a reminder, then there will be resolutions approving the board's determination tonight at Tuesday's Board of Education meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that, we have a meeting, we are going to call an executive session. We have a meeting next, you just said it, next Tuesday, March 19th at 7:30 here in the high school, middle school campus presentation room, where we will have a budget discussion, and we'll be voting to sign off on this proposed capital bond that would go before voters on May 21st. With that, can I get a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of discussing employment history of particular persons and
And student matters.
student
Confidential student matters.
Confidential student matters.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break.
I definitely find it.
Thank you, everybody.
So do we see